Good morning and welcome to another Kenny Cars and Coffee, or Coffee, Cars and Kenny. The people who've been watching for a while know what that means. But we also have a new contender, Cars, Whiskey, and Kenny. And I'll get into that a little bit later on. But we got a lot of cool things to talk about today. If you're just joining us for the first time, I'm Kenny Brown, and we're going to spend the next hour answering your questions and try to share some of my extensive knowledge from over 40 years in motorsport, professional motorsports, and building performance cars. And the subject matter is always what you guys want to know. I talk about what you want to know, and the questions come from the Speed Therapy Society. If you're not a Speed Therapy Society member, join. I mean, there's going to be a lot of cool stuff in there. We're starting a reference file in there for the members. And I see some of those heart-shaped wrenches and thumbs coming up already. You guys are awesome. The main subjects today, and these are from people's questions, are going to be about from Brian, setting up ride height and how bump steer affects ride height or vice versa. A brief touch on AERO, because that's a huge subject that David and Brad asked about. And kind of the show and tell is going to be related to Kobe wanted to know that Watts link and Panner bar and how that relates to roll center. And that's one of my favorite subjects, and you'll see why. Let's see, we got some shout outs. Andrew shared us with the Ford Performance Group. Mike shared with SVT Cobra's owners and Christian Car Club. Andrew shared with the Mustang Road Racers, and Brad shared with the Track Guys Performance Driving Events. That's great. We love that. If anybody else has some groups out there that you think that they could get some value and knowledge from what we're doing, please have them join up. And I'm sure Kerry knows how to do that, but I don't. But okay. And you know what? What did you do? I guess we had a technical adjustment. Something I just realized this morning is this is the 15th episode.
Yes, 15.
I can't believe it. 15 Kenny Cars and Coffee. I don't know, it just goes that fast, and we keep coming up with good questions. Let's see some other. As you know, I gotta have my notes. I got too many things to remember. Some carryovers. You're gonna make me seasick.
Okay, why don't you just, is it okay?
Yeah.
Okay.
To me, it's okay. Is it okay to you?
Yep. Yes.
We're going to follow up on some questions from before, and also we talked about brake fluid and the temperatures. I think was it last week or the week before, and we're going to post up in the Speed Therapy Society the different dry boiling points of the different major brake fluids, and you're going to see why we've switched over to Bear brake fluid, because it's got the highest dry boiling point, and the higher the better. Okay, and let's see, rotor temperature. I think Chris and somebody else asked about the life of our brake rotor temp. Well, we called the manufacturer, and according to them, the minimum is 2 years if it's kept in your garage. If you keep it in the trailer where it's hot all summer, it probably will last one season. I know I've had them for multiple seasons, and it's never gone bad. But the trick is to tell when it is starting to go off is if you start seeing little yellow crystals in there, then it's time to throw it away and get another one. And then we talked before that comes with this really handy chart on, see, as it starts out red, and as it gets hotter and hotter, the color changes. So you can see what the maximum temperature is on the rotor. And let's see, mine runs right here at about 1200 degrees in the front. Now the rear is just a little bit cooler. So that's 2 years minimum, keep it in the garage. I've had some last longer than that. Also, we want to thank all the people that donated to the Resilience Racing Fundly campaign. Cliff, John, Dino, Andrew, Julie, Chino, and Rick. This is a super worthy cause. These guys are developing complete hand control system for wounded warriors that they can drive completely from the steering wheel. So even the guys that have prosthetic legs will be able to drive, and they're doing a racing series with that, which I think is amazing. In the just $25 donations, and that's to help finish off the hand controls. So like I say, it's a really good, really good cause. And you know what? This is 15 episodes. How many of you guys have been with us since the very beginning? Let me know who's been here since the very beginning, and then who just joined and about what time they joined, because that's kind of interesting. I'm just blown away. Oh, remember to invite your buddies. I couldn't do this without Carrie's notes. And there's also, I try to do maybe 3-4 a week, complimentary 15-minute consults for people that have questions, need to make purchasing decisions. You know, I can help them with all that. I try to do best. If I can answer the questions, I do. If I can't, then I'll tell them I can't. Let's see. Let's start. See, we got all the little stuff in. Oh, also on the resource, some people have asked about a track day setup sheet. I've got the one I use is pretty much for pro racing, and there's a lot of stuff on there that you wouldn't need and could confuse you. So I'm going to pare that down to something a little more basic, and that we're going to talk about in the 5-day transform your driving experience. I know. When are we going to have it? Well, hopefully next week we'll be able to give you a date. This whole virus thing is just kind of throwing everything for a tizzy. So, but yeah, we're going to have that in the Speed Therapy Society and the Transform Your Driving Experience. That'll be part of the curriculum. We can get into, also, if you got questions, send your questions in. We'll take a segment and we'll talk about questions and answer your questions. So let's get into, here's the quick hitters. Okay, I said join Speed Therapy Society. We talked about shelf life of rotor paint. Jim Bauman is the one that came up with the Cars, Whiskey, and Kenny. And he says that there's over 100 more people watch this after the show than watch it live. And he's saying most of them probably watch it in the evening, so it should be Kenny, Whiskey, and Cars, Whiskey, and Kenny. However, he spelled whiskey, W-H-I-S-K-E-Y. I spelled whiskey, W-H-I-S-K-Y. What's the difference, you ask? I'm glad you asked. The W-H-I-S-K-E-Y is actually American whiskey or Irish whiskey. The W-H-I-S-K-Y is Scottish whiskey, Canadian whiskey, and malt that comes from Japan. So, and Scottish, because of my Scottish heritage, now I'm really have an affinity for single malt Scotch. It's one of my few pleasures in life, and I have a pretty good collection. If anybody's never tasted single malt Scotch, it's something you got to kind of have to warm up to. A lot of people, kind of, let's say it's a man's drink, okay? And let's see, artwork. Last week we had my dad ship from World War II, and this week we've got Jimmy Clark back up there. Can you see Jimmy Clark? Yeah. And he's the reason I put him back up because it's the month of May, and month of May in Indianapolis is pretty special. That's the Indy 500. Of course, it's later this year, but Jimmy Clark, my boyhood hero, won the Indy 500 in 1965 in a Lotus 38. And what in the world are you doing? And it threw me off. Anyway, I happened to be in person at the Watkins Glen Grand Prix in 1967 when Jimmy Clark won. And that is the day that kind of set my whole future in cars and motorsport. I mean, I came away from that just a whole different person. And it was pretty awesome to see. And so I've got Jimmy Clark back up here. That's actually Zandvoort. That's the first outing of the new, let's see, the new Lotus 49, and it kind of won going away. So that's why Jimmy Clark's up there, and this is also signed by Keith Duckworth. He was the Worth of the Cosworth group. Okay, let's get down to John Bauman. Cars, Whiskey, and Kenny. For people who are watching us at night, and let us know who you are and if you like Cars, Whiskey, and Kenny. I thought it's pretty cool. I like it. But John also is the World War II. He studies World War II, and I'll add a little more to what I talked about last week. My dad was in a destroyer escort in the Pacific Fleet, and he survived the war. Now his brother, my Uncle Norman, unfortunately he was in the Army Air Corps, and he's buried in Normandy. And my Uncle Alec, which is my mother's brother, was on the Merchant Marines, and their ship got sunk by a torpedo, and he was in the North Atlantic for, I don't know, a long time in the freezing water, and he survived, but he wasn't a real person after that. He was institutionalized for the rest of his life. So that's my World War II history for John. And Christopher is one who's looking for the car setup sheet, and like I say, that's going to be in the Speed Therapy Society. New members, where did you find out about us? I mean, that's always good information to know where people came from. If you just kind of stumbled on it or somebody shared it with you. Carrie always wants that information. Okay, we're going to get into, I think I got through all the stuff I'm supposed to say. Another thumbs up, car-shaped wrenches. We love those things. Brian Armstrong asked about ride height. Setting ride height, what's the best ride height, and how that affects bump steer. I'm going to start with ride height. The ride height is wherever you want it to be, quite frankly. That's why we use like JRZ shocks that have their coilovers and they're adjustable, so we can set the ride height to anything we want. But in looking at ride height in general, if you've got coilovers, kind of like a general rule is because it's all different. A lot depends on the car and the size of your tires. Look at this. Look at the diameter of your tires. If the diameter is 26.5 inches, then think around 27.5 would be a good ride height. And the way I measure ride height was just super simple. You just take a tape measure, measure from the ground through the center of the wheel up to the fender lip. Fender lips are a constant, so they're always there. When kind of like when we go racing, in a lot of series they have like a minimum ride height, and typically it's around 3.5 inches. So what we do is we'll set up kind of a little test block, go no go test block. That's if the ride height minimum is 3.5, we'll set it at 3.25. So we've got a little bit of extra room, and we'll get the ride height set perfect. Then go around and measure it all four corners. So we'll know on the fly that we can't go below that number, or we're going to run afoul of tech inspection. So that's an easy way to do it. And anytime you do, like if you're going to put a new set of shocks and springs on, check your ride height first, and then see what it is afterwards, because then you can adjust it. The other thing is just step back and look. Does the car look the way you want it to? Is it low enough? And the other thing to consider, if you've got a really steep driveway, you don't want it too low. You're going to kind of scrape going up. And also if you're in one of those places that have these stupid speed bumps, of course the Brits call them sleeping policemen, you don't want it too low, you're going to scrape across that. So that's how I kind of set ride height, and it's purely subjective. Like I say, a typical starting point is 1 inch above the tire diameter, which gives you about 1 inch clearance in the fenders. Now if you've got really wide fenders, you might be able to go a little bit lower. But if you go too low, then you're going to your suspension geometry starts going south. Getting down, we typically, like I say, we run a lot of like 26.7 inch tires, so we're looking at a 27.5, 27.75 ride height. So that's how to set ride height. Now the other part is bump steer. Now when you lower a car, it kind of affects bump steer. What is bump steer? Bump steer is when you go across a bump and the wheel wants to steer a different direction because of the geometry in the front end. Now, the easy, quick way, kind of like a really quick down and dirty way to adjust your bump steer, take a look at the lower control arm and the tie rod. If they're going in different directions, you're going to have severe bump steer. If they're parallel, you're going to take most of the bump steer out. Now, what we do, this is a standard tie rod end for a Mustang. You can see the height on it. We actually had a company make these up for us a number of years ago. It's called a bump steer tie rod end. Notice the difference. And the reason we did this, because a lot of people don't want, I mean, the other way to do bump steer is get some of these like rod end and do all the spacer thing to get it right. But rod ends take maintenance and they'll have a tendency to rattle. Or this is like OE quality. It's even greasable. So you just kind of put it on, and it's at a general height that will correct most Mustangs bump steer. If it doesn't correct it, it gets it a whole lot closer to what it was. So that's kind of a way we look at bump steer. Now the SN95s, that's kind of a whole different car. What we do with that is the steering rack is mounted on bushings. And what we do, let's see if you can see this, we use an offset rack bushing. And what we want to do is we want to move the rack up so we can kind of help the bump steer. And that's pretty quick and easy for adjusting bump steer on a SN95, or you can get the one that's got all the washers and rod ends and kind of work your way through that. So I hope that answered your question. The right height, whatever you want. But always be sure to record it whenever you're doing anything. Okay. I'm gonna jump down to Kobe, and we'll get back to AERO in a minute. And yes, if your questions are coming in,
I haven't asked yet, but
yeah, send your questions in. We're going to have plenty of time to get the questions today. As like I say, I talk about what you want to know about. So Kobe wanted to know my thoughts on Watts Link Panner Bar and then Roll Center. Okay, Watts Link and Panner Bar are basically the two systems of locating lateral location of the rear axle, anything that's got a parallel control arms. Now for cars that have double splayed control arms, that means one set goes this way, one set goes that way. That'll be self-centering, so that'll self-center the axle. But if you've got parallel control arms like in the S197, you have to use something to contain that lateral movement of the axle, and the only two ways, the basic ways, are the Watts Link and the Panner Bar. The Watts Link has been around for a really long time. And people probably know the Watts Link has some arms and it's got a bell crank in the middle. That keeps the axle centered. Watts Link has been around since 1784 when James Watts patented it. So that's been around a long time. Now Panner Bar is considerably newer. The Panner Bar came about with the Panhard Automobile Company of France in the early 1900s. So both of these methods have been around for a really long time, and they're probably much thing everybody uses, either a Watts Link or a Panner Bar to locate the axle. Like I say, nobody's come up with anything significant in the last 100 years. So we'll talk about that more in weeks to come. Now, the Watts Link is by far the best way to locate an axle because it lets the axle move perfectly up and down. A Panner Bar, because it's got a bar that runs across, it's going to be a little bit of an arc, so it's not going to be 100% up and down, but with the long Panner Bars that come in the Mustang, the arc isn't going to be that great. Now, where the Watts Link pivot point is, that's your roll center. Where the Panner Bar crosses the center line of the car, that's your roll center. Now, the Mustang roll center is pretty high. It's like they look right through the middle of the axle. And you can feel that if you think about going around a corner, spiritedly on track, you can feel that inside tire kind of get loose, or not loose, but kind of you get a little light in the back. That's because the point you're rolling around is in the middle of the axle. Now Watts Link, the problem with the Watts Link, I love them, but they're not practical for the S197. Because there's only so far you can move that Watts Link down when the bell crank will start hitting into stuff. So, I mean, that you can get, there's a lot of different ones out there. I haven't kept up with them. I know I'm seeing that they're adjustable. The ones that are on the chassis are better than the ones on the axle, in my view. Yeah, but here's the thing. you can't get it low. You can't move the roll center down. And I like low roll centers. It keeps the back of the car down. It takes some energy off the outside front, which will help the car turn, and you can get to the gas sooner through the middle of a corner because you don't have to wait as long for the axle to settle. Well, what we do, back in my Trans Am days in the 90s, what we did is we took a Watts link and we mounted it horizontal to the bottom of the differential. Now, it's easy in a Trans Am car because they've got what's called an underslung chassis, which means the chassis comes underneath the axle. So it's pretty easy to just run the Watts links over to the chassis, and you've got the benefits of a Watts link for axle control, and you've got the roll center at the bottom of the diff. What I do with in our rear grip kit, which is rear grip kit is it's parts, but it's a complete engineered system for maximum traction and control in the back. And part of that key is what we call roll center relocation kit. And I move the roll center down from the middle of the differential to the bottom of the differential. Remember that? Bottom differential, Trans Am. And we do that with a couple of brackets. Here, this is the axle bracket. And you can see we go down about 4 inches. I'll go this way. You can see the hole. We move the roll center down about 4 inches. And on the chassis side, this kind of just slides up in the panel bar thing. Again, you see we go down 4 inches, and there's 2 different holes at the bottom. And the reason for that is whichever hole makes it the most level. If it's about the same, always put in the bottom hole. That keeps the roll center down. And then with our panel bar, here's our panel bar, part of the rear grip kit. And like all our panel bars and control arms with the rod ends get anti-seize before they go in, and we have offset bushings. You can see that to keep the panel bar away from the differential. And just like on our lower control arms, we have what we call rattle rings. And the purpose of that is, rod ends have a tendency to kind of move around. So if they move over, that's so they don't touch metal and don't rattle. Call them rattle rings. We've got that on these, and also the lower control arms. And the combination of the lower roll center